Welcome to Industry Insights with Route Consultant, your front row seat to the fast-moving world of logistics and beyond. Each week, we bring you game-changing insights, real-world strategies, and fresh perspectives to fuel smarter investments and build stronger businesses. Join us as we sit down with expert guests to explore emerging trends and pressing topics across a wide range of industries. This is Industry Insights. Welcome back to Industry Insights. Today we have Bryan Duhl and Fernando Nando Martinez here from Phoenix Aviation Solutions. Bryan and Nando bring a deep military and logistics experience to a business focused on aviation logistics, contracted pilot solutions, and risk management for high-profile clients. But today's conversation isn't just about aviation. It's about delivering excellence in businesses that depend on timing, planning, safety, and execution. So Bryan and Nando, welcome to the studio. Thanks for being here.
Josh, thank you, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we're definitely going to talk about Phoenix Aviation. I want to go through all of that. But before that, I know that you guys had a career before Phoenix Aviation. So let's start back a little bit. What did you guys do before you got into this business?
So, Josh, again, man, thank you for having us. I'm a Nashville native. Okay. My wife and I are both from East Nashville,
yeah.
and grew up. Our grandmothers lived across the street from each other.
Okay, so you lived in East Nashville back when it was a little bit different than it is today, too.
Yeah, it's had its ups and downs in time, but yeah, I mean, we literally kind of grew up across the street. Our families going to high school and all the things. So I love this area. Yeah. I'll remain in this area for as long as possible until, there's a need to go other places. Nando actually lives downtown, and is from here, and I think also is happy with what Nashville brings to everything. So
stuck here with the rest of us. We're happy about it, but yeah.
Yeah. So to answer your question, before Phoenix Aviation Solutions, about 2 months ago, I was actively employed by the United States Army, and we are both. Nando was actually one of my former commanders in a unit that's just here at Fort Campbell that does special operations things with aviation assets for the nation to go prosecute targets anywhere on the face of the earth with a moment's notice. It's an extraordinary machine, if you will, that takes quite a bit of. I can't even comprehend the amount of logistics and personnel and money that go into a successful mission execution. But we were part of that, man, and it was just the most rewarding thing from me. I never envisioned. Coming from, growing up and being a civilian and going to high school, and I've always had an entrepreneurial, mindset and desire to build an enterprise and a business. But being exposed to that and then offered to, accept an invitation to come assess and be part of that unit in my progression of becoming a pilot and doing all that was one of the greatest honors, other than my children and being married to my wife and in my life. So, it's been a really, really cool journey to now end up a partner in Phoenix Aviation Solutions, which is a business that we started out of necessity. We were asked to start this business by an ultra wealthy individual out west after a tragedy happened, and a family and nine souls lost their lives out of a helicopter crash. Mm-hmm. And the insurance agency and some of the folks that really drive, insurance drives everything, asked this individual to find a solution to solve their aviation needs and their problems. So what we do is we integrate, from detailed planning, and we look at everything as kind of a linear timeline to meet a successful outcome for companies or for individuals. We start as early as we can to develop that timeline to get them everything that they need. And it was actually really cool when you guys asked us to come talk about this. I started paralleling, the logistical, approach to, our business model, and everything revolves around logistics. We can't do anything without people and a great team that does the pre-planning all the way through the follow-up after everything is complete, to provide that package, if you will. So
tell me a little bit more about Phoenix.
Yeah. This is actually really cool because the world of logistics is just a pre-planning process to get to an end state of whatever is being delivered as the result, right? So whether you guys managing routes and advising businesses on the most streamlined approach at utilizing their assets in whatever means via that's ground. I mean, we live in the aviation realm with Phoenix, and we advise and provide capability. The only difference between these two, and one of my best friends works for y'all's company, Matt, and we've had a lot of conversations, is our trucks just fly. I mean, that's it. There's it's literally the same thing. So if we can't get speeding tickets, we can't have flat tires, right? But the solution, the pre-planning and the routes, the routes that we take, we don't have traffic. I mean, we might have some traffic at via ATC and have to go around some densely populated areas to get to an end state. But we use one of the guys that was a mentor of mine, and he's still on the compound and teaches folks from the special operations community. He would say, let's plan with a microscope and a razor, and then let's go execute with an axe. So it's like, when it's time to go and do, you guys do it via the ground and we do it via the air.
And what is kind of the role split between you two at Phoenix?
So I'm the CEO of the organization of Phoenix. The way that we in special operations, everything's based around Greek mythology, right? Okay. And so it's not Phoenix, Arizona. But it is, the rising of the next phase. That's where Phoenix came from. Nando is a partner. He's in charge of our business development for that. And him being a former commander of mine, he is a beautiful mind, if you will, to be able to, grasp all of the concepts that are needed. So it's my other founder, Shane Kalaher, who he's out west. He lives out in Bozeman, Montana. Kind of runs he's our chief of flight operations, but Nando is kind of the guy that gets all the contracts, all of the big idea of what we need to do to be successful, and then processes it and ensures that people are going where they need to go to meet mission success, if you will.
Yeah. Now I'd imagine a significant amount of what you all are doing and planning and building to the business today depends on everything that you learned while you were in the military. Can you talk a little bit about, if you're a civilian, myself, for example, I don't have a lot of experience with a lot of things that you guys probably went through and learned and did. So can you talk a little bit about how some of the things you may have learned in the military that are impacting what you're building today?
Absolutely. And actually, Nando, if you want to take that, I mean, I would start with they beat you down and rebuild you. I mean.
Yeah. So, there's a lot there, right? Yeah. So in the military, there's a lot of moving pieces, like Bryan said, and what most people see and focus on, what movies hit on, is the tactical side of the military, the action, or what we call the X. The decisive point of any operation is going to be, where it's decided, the victory, if you will, right? But reality is that there's a lot more behind that leads to that point. So when we say as helicopter guys and special operations, right, we talk about the landing at the X. That's like where the action happens, right? You're landing at what we call a target. Let's say a group of operators is exiting the aircraft in whatever method that they're going to, whether that's on the ground or via ropes or some other method. And then they're going to go and do whatever it is that the mission is, whether that's to kick in a door and go capture somebody or, a variety of other things. That is the part that people are familiar with the military. That's the part that you see TV shows and movies, right? But what you don't see is everything that lines up before that. And so Bryan and Shane and a few of our other folks on the Phoenix team, we're all aviators, but they served as warrant officers, which in the Army specifically, a warrant officer is a technical expert. I like to talk about them. They're, an inch wide and a mile deep. So as aviators, they know everything there is to know about aviation and everything that goes into it, and they are complete experts. I had a slightly different background, so I was an officer. Mm-hmm. And as an officer, it's a different type of an officer, because obviously a warrant officer is an officer as well, but on what they call the commission officer side, or what, these guys call the RLOs, or the real life officers, right? Because we always have a lot of witty banter between us. But my job was more on the leadership, managerial side. I was still an aviator. I did a lot of flying, but throughout my career, I would move in and out of flying roles and into more managerial roles, command and leadership roles, as well as things like I worked, for example, as a liaison to a ground unit, sort of like an aviation consultant within the military. Whereas these guys get to stay more tactical, solving those tactical problems. So my role as we integrate the team is to provide them with all the support that they need to do that. So if Bryan is the flight lead of an operation, he's going to solve the tactical problem. How do we get the customer from point A to point B with all the parts and pieces necessary? I need fuel here. I need, a logistics trail that gets me X, Y, and Z supplies at this location. And I'm going to get us where we need to go. Here's the threats, all that. As an officer, my job would be to integrate with him and make sure all that stuff is teed up. And so if I have to coordinate, let's say we're operating from X base, we're going to go to target here, and there's other military units, adjacent to us. I'm going to do that coordination with those other units and make sure, hey, we need fuel at this location. I'm going to make sure it's there, or my team is going to make sure it's there. And so in my, background in the military, I did do a lot of the tactical things, but I was able to gain a really strong appreciation for all the other sort of background stuff that needs to happen for that force to get on target and do their business, whether that's making sure ammunition is where it needs to be and everything's lined up. Hey, the gunship needs these rockets. Okay, we're going to coordinate with the people who do that piece. And there's teams of people in each of these. There's logisticians, people making sure everyone has food and supplies and water, and making sure there's ammo in different locations, making sure there's fuel, a whole logistical trail for just maintenance with parts. And so there are, for the force of, let's say 100 or 150 operators and aviation air crews that go to the target, there's probably 3 or 4 times that number of people that are in various locations, making sure that all the little pieces are where they need them to be. And that's one of the things that I think directly correlates to what we do. And that's sort of one of the things that I bring to the team, because, I am an aviator and I'm a pilot, and I've spent a lot of time flying, but I've spent, a tiny amount of flying compared to what these guys do. But what I bring is a little bit of that piece to the team that helps us put the whole picture together.
Yeah. It's definitely not something I've spent much time thinking about, is how much has to go into every single mission and every single bit of operation that you guys are doing in the military. I'm sure there's, like you said, there's 10 times as much time spent planning and preparing as there is actually executing. But that's the part that we miss. But it's the part that, if it didn't happen, none of the execution works either.
That's usually where missions fail, actually. Yeah. Tactically, we don't really lose fights typically. The U.S. military, I should say. For the most part, even going back in history, I'm sure you can find some things. But from a tactical, maneuvering, and fight position, the U.S. military is very, very competent. And, being in the special operations world, we got to work with a lot of the best and the best people And not to say that the conventional force isn't very, very competent, because they are, but in special operations, it's very specialized. There's different funding, there's additional tools and pieces of equipment, even things like the ability to go to the range and shoot more often. So there are things like that. And all of that has to do with funding lines and people planning for that stuff so that force can be the best. And that's what we bring into, that's one of the things I should say we bring into the civilian world. And I'll just give you one example, but, in aviation, right, and especially coming from our background, we like to pre-plan as many contingencies as we can possibly think of. And we've got a plan in place for when X, Y, and Z things go wrong, whether that's an aircraft breaking and having a spare, or having specific spare parts available because of the trends. So understanding the machine that we fly and what its trends are and which parts might need more attention. So things like that, there's maybe one part that I've never seen that thing break, right? And so you're not as worried per se, but then there's one thing that you're like, okay, this thing has a, pieces of equipment have sort of a life to them, based on wear and tear and everything else. But, whether that's weather or medical is another big one. So if we're flying an ultra high net worth client in and around an area, we're going to do a lot of things behind the scenes that they never see, like something as simple as coordinate with every hospital in the area ahead of time. Oh, wow. So we have a medical contingency in place, should they have some sort of medical emergency on the aircraft or in the vicinity of the aircraft, whether that's a trip and a fall or, a heart condition or whatever it is. We've already thought through what the steps are. Mm-hmm. And so we are not reacting. We are just putting the next plan in place.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the types of things that I'm sure set you apart from others and are part of the whole solution is why somebody would hire you. And we'll get into more of that as well. We've talked kind of broad strokes here on your military background. I don't know how many stories you can share, but are there any stories that pop into mind that kind of helped color and shape how you think about planning and execution from your time in the military?
I would say coming from, not having a lot of resources, you get very creative.
Okay.
Right. And your approach to solving, problems, you quickly distill, out of the three of us that are sitting here, when presented with an extraordinary problem set, like you're going to figure out real quick whether your team is capable of thinking outside the box to get that envelope across the United States for signature for whatever in the civilian realm of things with redundancy, planned, or whether it's like, hey man, like I'm just a pilot and, if weather's bad, like we're just not going, so we find a way to get to yes, at almost any cost.
Okay.
So that, one of the themes with us is the answer's, going to be yes. And I think, not to talk specific missions from the past, but that's what is different from, and we're hiring folks out of, our, that have similar backgrounds to us to then bring that to the civilian market, exclusively. So that's, I can't think of a specific, hey, we had, something go on where we weren't, and this might sound arrogant, but successful. Like, time is the one thing that you can't get back, right? So we try to be the best stewards of an individual or a company or, whoever our customer. We'll refer to, everyone as our customer, in a subservient manner, but time and capability are our primary focus. Man, I've always had like an entrepreneurial spirit. One of the guys that actually works with us, his name's Alan. He does a lot of our graphic design and website type stuff. Him and I were best friends growing up. We were pulling our lawnmowers behind our bicycles, like going up and down the street, like trying to hustle and cut people's grass. And if they were, if we'd get done and everything was just as perfect as we could make it because we have an extraordinary, attention to detail. I mean, I still do things with this guy and like, he's like, oh, this is not exactly perfect. So we'll spend, extraordinary amount of time to do that. But the customer at the end of the experience, the end of cutting grass or this, that, and the other, even if they weren't present, would always come back to us and say, hey, you guys did such a great job. Can you do this next thing? And so the answer was always yes. I mean, if we didn't know how to pressure wash, cut down a tree, whatever, like we would bid out the next thing to offset some of those costs so that then we would gain the next level of capability. Mm-hmm. I just took that from a young age. I mean, let's say like 12 or 13, pre-driving, and would hustle, go ask the football coach if we could use a trailer after we got our first trucks to then drive around. And then I grew that, to pay for my own college, to go to Tennessee Tech, earn a degree, work out in the civilian world before I came into the Army. And then that mentality, with our that's what our nation's looking for, like the problem solvers, the folks that can get to a yes, pay attention to detail, and then capitalize on that. And then I spent, 21 years in, the military and just honed those skills. And then we rewind, a few years ago, starting Phoenix Aviation Solutions and applying that spirit of like, hey, I want to do a good job, but I also want to create an environment and support families. So I need to generate revenue, to then transition out into the civilian world and then put myself into situations with business owners, with ultra high net worth individuals, with folks that want to complement their ability to move wherever on the face of the earth, and then preserve their capacity, which is what we do. We sell time. I mean, essentially. Mm-hmm. So we, instead of a 2-hour drive, it'll be a 20-minute, helicopter ride, or to get across, the United States, it'll be us reaching out to our network and providing, a jet solution or a charter, service with folks that I have relationships with in the industry that isn't just. I mean, you can Google anything. You can go you can go on, the web or your app and be like, hey, I can get, whatever at the cheapest, price. But even when Alan and I were cutting grass, we weren't the cheapest solution. Mm-hmm. We weren't the cheapest, we didn't ever strive to be. We just strived to be the best. And so then we gained a reputation. Young, teenagers and entrepreneurs, we were like, wow, like if you do a good job, people will reward you for doing a good job. Mm-hmm. And then they will realize your value. So value in industry, I think, directly correlates with talent and ability, right? And as long as you have a vision for your entrepreneurs to hone in on what that is with a good team of leadership, you can direct that capability in whatever industry. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. In my mind, and maybe this is me being very, short-sighted, but I'm sure there's a lot of work that goes into all this, but it's just being the best. And then, not touting, but, advertising yourself as like, hey, we can come in and do whatever you need, but there's a lot of trust that has to be gained in that process. Mm-hmm. Well, you, Josh, or your team, like if someone vouches for you as an industry expert, and then you can use that as a stepping stone to get in business with the next, mm-hmm. the next person that's out there, and then they see that you do a great job. I also don't focus on money. Like I don't even like to talk about it. I just want to do the best job that I can. Everything else comes with time.
Hey guys, we just wanted to pause for a moment to invite you to our free events that are happening throughout the year. Whether you're just getting started in the logistics industry or you're looking to optimize your current operation, Route Consultant has events that are designed specifically for you. So head on over to routeconsultant.com/events or check out our show notes to register for free today. Also, while you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Industry Insights with Route Consultant podcast so that you don't miss out on the stories, the advice, and the updates that are happening throughout the industry. We appreciate you being here and hope to meet you in person soon. Now let's get back to the episode.
In the military, you always have a plan, right? And then you have contingency plans, or like, as Mike Tyson loves to say, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. That very much fits in combat, but also in business. And in the world of civilian aviation, it fits. Maybe some of the variables are quite a bit different, but then there's a lot that are very similar where, we have a plan and this is how the mission is supposed to go down. But I can think of plenty of times where a mission didn't go down at all like that, but we still hit the end state. And I think what that comes down to is not just pre-planning, but a deep understanding of all the moving parts. And actually this is a good example with us together in the unit. So Bryan was, a flight lead, which is a prestigious progression position as pilots within this unit. This was actually on his flight lead evaluation where he's being evaluated, and this evaluation is not like one mission. It goes on for months where you shadow senior pilots and then do the work while they're looking over your shoulder, second guessing everything. And then you eventually kind of progress towards doing the leading of the mission while they're second guessing and throwing all kinds of contingencies and all kinds of things until eventually you do a series of tests and evaluations and training missions where then they will evaluate you with one kind of final one. And this was Bryan's actual final one. And we were obviously in the unit together. I was the air mission commander. So kind of one of the leadership roles within the flight where he is the flight lead taking us to the target. And we had a maintenance issue. And this was, so the funny thing about his evaluation, because the evaluators, they have all these pre-planned things that are going to go wrong that they're going to throw at you. But so many things went wrong, I should say, didn't go as planned in real life that they didn't have to throw very many fake contingencies at them because we had like real aircraft breaks. We had real issues on the target, which now this is not combat, it's training. It was really more of a coordination issue where we couldn't actually land where we were supposed to. And they sort of masked that as a tactical thing. Oh, the enemy did this now. But in reality, we weren't allowed to land there because somebody had a miscommunication in the background. So
as I was going to ask is how much of it did you think was like a fake versus
he doesn't know.
He didn't know at all.
And I don't either because I'm in the flight.
Okay.
So while I'm not necessarily being evaluated, everything I do to either help or hurt his evaluation, it's still on his shoulders because that's part of it. And so, but Bryan and I working together through the plan and the whole team, we had a very deep understanding of all the parts and pieces. And so in this particular instance, we have on these aircraft, they were, specialized Black Hawks, and they have fuel probes so they can fuel in flight, which is, a few units can do that. But this particular mission required 2 of the 4 to fuel in flight and 2 of the 4 to land and fuel, just the way all of the things were planned. And one of the aircraft that was supposed to do the aerial fuel, their probe was broken. Their aircraft was just fine, but the one thing they needed to get gas didn't work. And we were able to, just by knowing, okay, here's all the parts and pieces, here's how everything works, and here's what everybody's role is, we were able to very quickly do a crew swap. So literally every person in the 2 helicopters switched at the last second. We taxied out in a different order and essentially drove on, continued the mission. And that was just the first of many dominoes. And there were many adjustments from flight speed changes due to some other things, changes to the landing plan in flight based on some things on the ground, and then a few other like curveballs that the evaluators threw in. But the end state was we hit the target plus or minus 30 seconds like we always do. We delivered our precious cargo, or those ground, those ground operators, or in today's world, it might be an executive and their family, or whoever else, maybe on our aircraft is our precious cargo. We deliver it where it's supposed to be delivered, when it's supposed to be delivered, and that's the standard. And we've taken that, we take some of the tactical pieces out of that, but the planning is still there, whether it's weather, whether it's medical contingencies, logistics and fuel, having backup fuel plans, or dry leasing another aircraft that's waiting for us to jump to in the event that ours breaks. Or, when it comes to weather, right? Pre-planning when we make the weather decision so that there is a ground backup contingency available, because we have to account for, hey, it's going to take us 40 minutes to get there via flight, but this is actually a 2.5-hour drive, which means we've got to actually make that call early enough for the principal to have that option so he or she can still make whatever it is that they're trying to get to.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about contingency planning all the time for small business owners. And I think for many small business owners, when something goes wrong, it feels like it's life or death. But for you all, a lot of times, these decisions you're making actually were life or death, and even still could be today in some of the decisions that you're making. But I think it just goes to show that there is a lot of similarity between what a lot of these logistics owners that we talk to and spend time with think about and what you all have done. And there's a lot that they can learn from some of the planning and tactics that you all are talking about. Now, I want to transition a little bit more to talking about Phoenix Aviation. So you brought up the story of kind of how you were asked to start this business, but at the time, were you thinking about running a business, or was it kind of a out of nowhere sudden decision you had to make there?
No, Josh, actually, I was serving, and I had a primary job, but the vision of looking 3 or 4 years ahead to ultimately, retiring from that career to move into something else with, my best friends and the folks that I've surrounded myself and been successful with, it just made sense. So there were a lot of, 2 to 3 a.m. where I was home at 5 o'clock. One thing about, our background is, and I'm dealing with a little bit of this right now, is a very unpredictable schedule. You'll maybe work a day on Monday, and then Tuesday you're, on a night schedule. Wednesday you still need to go back into work, and then you're on days for, Wednesday, Thursday, and then by Friday you're back on nights. So a lot of, sleepless, instances. And then I was trying to figure out, because our first, our primary, individual that wanted us to stand us up, he asked, my business partner and I, he was like, what are your barriers to entry? What do you need? And he was like, I will straight up write you a blank check to do whatever you need. But it comes down to that small business owner, like a human capacity to remain awake and make good decisions. We were actually talking about this on the drive here. Your most productive, time is usually the time that you wake up until a few hours into the day. And then there's a little bit of a lull for lunch, if you will, and then coming back and trying to recover and do something after that before then kind of shutting down. These new business owners, they've got families and lives and goals. They don't have the ability to shut down, if you will. Yeah. And so I did that with several of my guys, my founders, if you will, for a few years while we still did the nation's deed. So it was very rewarding to have our senior leaders of our organization say, "Hey, man, this is awesome what you guys have created and are doing." And we didn't tell anybody. Like I didn't tell hardly anybody for the first, because I was actually scared. I was like, man, am I going outside of like, I don't want to see anyone think any, lesser of me in a meeting or this, that, and the other, to be like, hey man, like, are you smoked right now? Are you okay? This, that, and the other. So we just run at 100%. Until we reset. I would sleep for like, when I got a day, I would sleep for the majority of the day to then recover, And so it's kind of funny looking back on it now, but my wife is, her name is Charlotte, is who I, would say is responsible for our success, because she did everything, homeschools the kids, runs, 11 different directions at the same time to do all the family logistics, which I was able to go, hey, you've got this, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's really how the business got started. It was just, I used some catchphrases here, but it was just running with scissors to enable, things to happen, for a couple of years in the background. And then, as I moved closer to retirement, I started saying, hey guys, like, we now have a capability. We've refined some of our processes. This works. And then we've just branched off in a couple of directions to assist law enforcement agencies and other folks to buy down risk and how they're training, how they're certifying their folks to meet that that solution, on multiple levels.
Okay. So if you're at a family gathering or a barbecue or something, what's the elevator pitch today on Phoenix Aviation? How would you describe it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's not a whole line of billionaires that go, hey, I'm lined up and waiting on Bryan and Nando to sell them a helicopter and a capability. But we provide, the most experienced pilots, maintenance, and staffing to give them a solution in the aviation industry for rotary wing operations that's out there. That's it, and it's pretty cut and dry. With that, my vision is to create an enterprise where I can hire folks as they retire out of these special operations units to then liaise and consult and train individuals in helicopters and aviation and other things as we move forward. So that's the primary vertical, and we've got a couple of smaller things that are spooling up and generating revenue.
So
I was gonna say, I'll just add, it's customer focused. So being aviators in the military, we always have a ground customer. So even active military unit members, they refer to the ground force as their customer. That's kind of how that translates. So we're very customer focused. So we are used to, from a military perspective, working with the most elite ground units who have a very minuscule margin of error. And that's what we're looking for, is the elite on the civilian side, whether that's in finance or business or whatever it may be, people who are high performers who have built something of their own, who now need these aviation solutions, or just, need some sort of transportation, logistics, aviation, who they have a need for these things, and they're the best at what they do. And so we look to pair people in aviation who are the best at what they do with that customer. So it's, that, because that's what they deserve. We see our customer base as the most elite at what they do. And there's something really special about watching someone in their element, whether that's an artist who can paint, or, we were fortunate enough to work with an organization called Creative Vets and do a really cool songwriting thing with some real country music songwriters. And it was so incredible to watch these people just take conversations and turn it into like really good music. And I was like, man, that is not something my brain is wired to do. So there's just something that's really cool about seeing someone who's just in their element at the peak of their game, whether that's sports or music or whatever it may be. And that's what we bring to aviation, and we pair that with those other folks from other industries.
So what does a typical interaction look like with a client? Like, when they come to you, what are they typically looking for you all to provide besides just transportation? Like, what is the vision for them?
Yeah. So they will want to, either they have or they want to acquire an asset to move them around and save them time.
Okay.
That's it. And they want to do it via the least amount of risk, because oftentimes they can't, even though they have all the money in the world, they can't. They're uninsurable at this point with the current folks that they have staffing their programs. Or my dad told me early in life, like, hey son, experience is what you get right after you need it. Depending on where you're at in your entrepreneurial journey or your corporation's existence, like, you don't want to have to pay for someone to gain experience in, if you could hire someone, Josh, that comes in and just has, 90% of the answers, your primary focus is going to be, I think, does that individual integrate into your culture and understand where your vision is for moving forward. And so we take a holistic approach and a very, razor's edge towards like, is that client right? Are we right for that client? Is that client right for us? And how can we complement them to get to where they want to be? So it's all about capability. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. That's so for them, their biggest thing is, they just want to offload all of the risk and all of the thought process on you all and make sure that they get there safely and efficiently.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what that ends up looking like from a business standpoint is, even on the accounting and the bookkeeping and this and the other, like they write us a check monthly, and then we have the reserves and all the things to provide them with this capability, and they don't have to do anything other than pick up the phone or text or email. This is what we want to do. And then we just jump through all the hoops to get them there and do all of the regulatory compliance behind the scenes to ensure that it's the right way. And then we also, via contractual means, Shane and I had, the vision. I spent a lot of times. One of the things I did for our organization was, writing doctrine, writing the procedures and having them on paper. So via our legal team and insurance and other things, having a very clear, concise approach to what the scenario looks like. So we oftentimes will have a level of operational control of those assets, just like I did as a flight lead in an organization, even though a commander might say, hey, we're going to go do this or whatever. There was a certain understanding and empowerment by the technical and tactical experts saying, if you do that, it will not be successful. So this is what we're going to do with your assets to meet success. And then they would go, well, my job is to ensure that we have mission success. So, you have to be careful as to how you articulate yourself in doing that. But when the paperwork, the contract, the things that you put in place show them, a path to success and excellence, they will 100 times out of 100 go with that that way.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it sounds nice that they're giving you resources and just saying, hey, we're trusting you. But it's also, I'm sure, one of those things where these are clients with high expectations, and it's you fail once and that might be the last time you fail them. So while it is nice that they're providing you a blank check and you're just kind of running your plan, it's one of those where your plan needs to it better be perfect.
Well, and our job is to ensure mission success, right? And that trust has to be earned, because we can show you our track record. We can show you the things we've done both in and outside the military. But at the end of the day, you got to get those rotors turning. You got to get people on board, get them where they need to be safely. But not only that, they need to have a certain feeling when they get on. And one of the biggest compliments, somebody that we are now starting to do some business with, and part of the reason was because he was associated with someone else we were doing business with and was on a flight that Bryan was actually flying. And one of the biggest compliments that he said to him and to our business was, I've never felt so safe on a helicopter before. And this particular person spends a lot of time on aircraft based on what he does for a living, and specifically helicopters. And he said, I've never seen someone control not just the aircraft, but all the environmental factors that go with operating that aircraft. He's like, I put my kids on that helicopter all day. And that was probably one of the best compliments that we could receive. And now this is a person that we're starting to do some business things together with as well. Because while we talk about the skill of the pilots, we also talked about, talking about logistics, right? All the things in the background, and now we're not necessarily talking about bullets per se, right? We're still talking about fuel, but maybe not worried about, radar threats or things of that nature. But we are worried about regulatory compliance with the FAA and other government agencies where we can and cannot land that machine legally. We're worried about insurance requirements and making sure that if, God forbid, there is an incident, all those plans are in place. Because that's the last thing you want is to go outside of the realm of what you're insuring. And insurance is very complicated, right? It's very, and in aviation, it's very easy to accidentally do things outside of the scope of what you're insured for. So that's something that we take very seriously, so much so that, you know, Bryan had an insurance guy meet him at a charity event so he could run through a contract that I was sitting at my house, you know, putting the finishing touches on. You know, like that's the level of background stuff that we're talking about, because these clients, like, not only they pay for it, but they deserve it. And we put our money where our mouth is. If we're going to say that we're the most elite and this is why we're the most elite, then we have to show it. Yeah. And that goes beyond landing and flying helicopters. You know, that's everything that goes with it. And all the, you know, maintenance, fuel, food, you know, everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So you guys are bringing so much knowledge and experience, and you've seen how this works and how to do it well. But what's been some of the biggest, I guess, surprises or challenges as you transition from, I know how to do this well and I have an entire country's worth of resources backing me up, to I know how to do this well and it's the three of us? Like, what's been some of the biggest surprises there?
So that's actually a great topic, because I think that your accountant and your bookkeeper, your folks that you're going through profit and loss and quarterly, you know, like balance sheets and like all of the business side of things, like that will make or break you. We had some challenges early on just due to my ignorance of like how business actually, you know, works, that required us to go into personal reserves and asking, you know, folks for money to float, you know, salaries and other things early on. I think cash flow will absolutely crush a small business if you're not careful. 100%. And people look at me and go, well, I mean, what you guys are, you know, you're just staffing and managing these assets. Like, what's the big deal? But it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to, you know, float for a period of time and then try to collect, you know, that potential revenue on the backside and then cutting profits out of it. So it is a challenge, but yes, your accountant will make or break you.
Yeah. Cause it's nice to have U.S. military salaries as opposed to suddenly now I'm writing the salaries and trying to make it work.
Well, so people say, you know, when you come from a military background, they're like, oh, this must be a piece of cake to you, because you're like, they think, sometimes people think that everything you do in the military is high risk and you're always being shot at. And like, while those things happen, the best way that I can describe deployments in most combat is long periods of boredom followed by very short periods of extreme excitement, followed by long periods of boredom again, right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, the physical risk of operating aircraft overseas in combat is a real thing, right? But there is something to be said from an entrepreneurial standpoint for the financial risk and the reduction in, you know, whether that's comfort or predictability for finances when you go out and bet on yourself, which is what we've all done. Anyone who's done anything entrepreneurial has made a bet with themselves that I bet on myself to win, versus getting a more secure W-2 paycheck or something of that nature, right? There's a different type of stress, and that's something that was a big, you know, I wouldn't say it was a shock. Like I was kind of expecting it, but it was also different than what I thought when you leave the, you know, like, yeah, okay, nobody's shooting at me and that's cool, but, you know, I may have to go a few months without collecting a paycheck because of some things, and I have to have a plan for that, you know, in my own personal life. Yeah. And then you start then you got families and things like that all, you know, so that it's a very different level of stress. And I think that is something that I have a much better appreciation for, because not every risk is like physical risk to your body per se.
And Josh, when you employ, you know, multiple families and people, like the last thing that you're going to do, the last thing I'm going to do is say, hey, you don't have a paycheck on this day. So like whatever stresses that has, you know, to you, like we're just going to figure it out. You know, so there was some of that early on that we had to overcome. And I think every entrepreneur has to deal with that to a certain extent. And, you know, my connection to, you know, a businessman, whenever, you know, or woman, whenever, you know, I have those initial conversations, is like, hey, congratulations. Like you obviously have made it through, the first couple of years and have multiple successful entities and this, that, and the other, but I can now associate with them and you can't before. Yeah. Like you just have to go through it. Yeah. It's kind of like the assessment process of this unit and whatnot until you've done that, until you've made it, and been successful on the other end. Like you just don't have a certain connection with those folks. So,
yeah. So is there any other advice or anything else that you would say to somebody who's starting a business today as you're thinking about what you learned and the challenges along the way?
My advice to anyone that's out there is to have a vision, right? Like, and you probably already have that if you're starting a business. Like, pursue it with a relentless approach to success, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't be successful. Like, this country that we live in, I know all the politics, all the atmospherics of all the thing. It's very uncertain, and our energy and people's opinions, like they're all out there. But just stay focused on the end goal, and it's, in my mind, it's supporting families. Right? Our country would not be successful if we didn't have a free market economy and business folks out there that are absolutely crushing it every day to wake up and get after it. So, just start running a direction and don't look back. And you're going to find those that you can hook your bridle to and run with scissors in a direction, and they're going to naturally come out and want to be part of that, those successes and that vision, Yeah. So one of my greatest challenges is, and Nando and my business partners, my business partner that's not here, Shane, is really good about it. Like we literally can do everything if we want to, we can only do it at a 1% margin. Yeah. Or we can do one thing and be very good at it. I mean, we can probably do 2 or 3 things and be very good at it. Yeah. But when you get into the business arena, like if your job is to, own a small trucking company, and you're like, hey, you know what? I'm going to move medical supplies between, in a 50 nautical mile, or statute mile, radius of Nashville and the greater Nashville area. And then all of a sudden you get, a vendor that's in Memphis, and it's like, hey man, like I will pay you $500,000 to make 3 trips. Like, is that worth it? Well, I don't know, because I'm not managing your business. But now all of a sudden you've got half of your assets, you're detracting from your primary focus and goal here of what you envisioned your company to be successful in doing, and you're stretching and straining. Does that $500,000, allowance allow you to buy another truck or 2 and have redundancy? Because 1 is none in business. Literally, 1 is none. Yeah. Right. In aviation, 2 is none. 3 is a capability. Right. But you have to sit down with, the people that you trust and go, hey, Josh, does this make sense to you? And then you have to have the trusted group of, of friends and or business partners to be like, and these guys have told me numerous times, like, Bryan, that's a terrible idea, and it's cool. It's fine. You have to have the thick skin of so surround yourself with, good people, and be open to being criticized. And then, if you're all headed in the same direction, like I probably had 2 or 3 bad ideas this morning on our syncs and some of our, team meetings, and people are like, hey dude, like we should do it this way. Yeah. And I'm like, yep, absolutely. I've got a guy getting on an airplane to go out west right now. And he's like, what you said with this, he's like, yeah, we could probably do it, and but if we do it this way, and it just makes so much more sense, right? So surround yourself with those trusted advisors. Yeah, I think that's a great call out, because sometimes the hardest thing in a business is to say no to what seems like a good idea. Yeah. So having people who can tell you no, even if you don't see it, is really important.
I think there's a very fine balance, and this is something we've learned through many shiny objects and opportunities, because I think, there's a fine balance between being open-minded for potential opportunities and allowing yourself to get distracted from what your core competency is. And that's a lesson that we are still actively learning, but we have, the path from point A to B is not a straight line. We have meandered a little bit, and there have been times where one of us, or maybe a group of us, sometimes it's just one voice in the room that's like, is this what we do? And then we have to really think hard about it. And you're like, that does seem like a good opportunity, but I don't think it's in the long-term best interest of the company, because while that one contract could be cool and it would pay some good money for a period of time, that is probably a long-term detractor from what we're building. And so there's a fine balance, between still being open to some unique opportunities, but staying focused on what it is you do. And I think that's something that's very important. And it depends on the nature of whatever business you're in. But it's very important to with what Bryan said about vision and saying, okay, this is our vision and what is it that we do, and sticking to that. And now granted, you get big enough, you start branching off and, but when you're starting out, and that could be for a very long time, focusing in on what you are very good at could be very important.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important things that new business owners can do early on is figure out what are they good at, and if there are other things that they need to add to their capabilities, it's what are the right people, what are the right other vendors to work with to bake that out. But knowing what you're good at is, I think, one of the most important things you can figure out early on, so that you don't start wasting time and energy on something that's not where you want to
and do those other things complement that main thing. So we have taken on some things that are maybe not the exact thing that is our core competency, but we've found that those are things that complement that service.
Yeah, they accelerate the goal.
And it is of value to us. Yeah. And then we found some things that were like, ooh, this sounds really cool. And then we're like, that actually takes away from the main line of business, and maybe we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, I think there's lessons to learn across the board, and it's why it's always such a pleasure to have business owners like you all in here to share what you've learned and go through it with everybody who's listening. So I'll end it there. So Bryan, Nando, I thank you for coming, but I always have one more question for everybody who comes on. So we'll this will be the last one, but TV or movie or book, I'll allow book. Anything recent that you'd recommend that you've watched or read recently? You can do both if you want, but I like to have one of those at the end.
Yeah, that's great. I've got one right off the bat. And we actually were sent this from for our entire company. Another business owner. He owns Real Clean Detailing. It's a national franchise, and they do aircraft cleaning things. Oh, yeah. I was up in Indianapolis and had the pleasure of meeting Dustin, one of his guys. His name's also Bryan. Sent us a box of books, and it's interesting because I had just met this individual. His name's David Giarda. Okay. Hope I pronounced that right, but it's Unreasonable Hospitality. Okay. It's a bright yellow book, and it's I got through it really, really quick. I did some audio and then read. I actually think it's relaxing to sit and read for a period of time in the morning. But it's how do you take, and it was from he had a very successful restaurant business and owned the number one restaurant in the world. Okay. And I don't want to mess up any of the details or spoil it for anyone, but that book was an approach at how do you serve someone in the process of business and help them be a better version of themselves through hospitality, right? So it's an unreasonable approach towards hospitality. Okay. And it was really the customer experience in his restaurant and how he got the cooks and the wait staff and the food preparator, like all of the, his teams like on the same sheet of music to then yield a customer experience over dinner that would be unforgettable. So I think that you could apply that to any industry. Mm-hmm. And I had the honor of meeting David at a Alliant Bernstein thing here, and it's EO. It's called in Nashville. A group that brought him in, and he spoke. I think it was like a month or two ago. And man, just, his approach to, hospitality and an individual, like trying to make that person a better version of themselves, and his unrelentless approach towards doing that was amazing. So yeah, Unreasonable Hospitality. Look it up. That was a good one.
I think I want to find the restaurant too. Make me a better person
Yep.
if I just go eat some dinner. It sounds great. Yeah. You got anything?
Yeah. So this isn't a recent book, but and I read it a long time ago, but it actually recently kind of came back up for me because this person was actually on the Sean Ryan show just recently. Is a Pete Blaber.
Okay.
And he wrote a book called The Mission, The Men, and Me. It's a military book. He was so his background, he was a Delta Force operator and, an officer, commanded at a lot of levels, did all the things, But this book is just a general book about leadership. And it, the title kind of gives some of it away, and it talks to, and what our company is like with regards to the people. We have a mission that we are there to solve, or we have problems we're there to solve, and we have a vision, a shared vision, but that includes taking care of the people. And then sort of, the leaders eat last, which is another good book, but mentality of, hey, I'll take care of myself last. But when you're on a team of people that's always looking to take care of each other and solve problems together and achieve the same envisioned outcome, then you naturally get taken care of because you're all busy taking care of each other. And that's something that was a big leadership lesson for me in the military. And like I said, I read it a while ago, but it kind of recently popped back up on my radar just because he was on Sean Ryan show, which is obviously a big show, and that was very recent. So I'd say that's probably one for me.
And the best books will resurface at different times in your life. So those were both really good answers. Now give me, movie or TV, something. It doesn't have to be profound.
Well, should we start with Nando's socks?
Oh yeah. I am wearing the old C-3PO socks right here.
Yes.
While I am professional, I am still a child at heart.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I do love all the Star Wars stuff, so we share that.
Yep, that's true. That is me through and through. I don't have any Star Wars socks on today, but you almost caught me with them.
So I'm a big Mandalorian guy because I feel like it's
that movie comes out. Yeah,
I think I'm not that movie, but just that show because it's fun. It's like a Western, but also in Star Wars world. Yep. So I'll go with that one. That's
perfect.
Yeah, there's nothing profound about it. It's just a good time.
You don't need to. That doesn't need to be profound. It's just movies and TV shows.
It's just a good time.
And then I'm anything like lately. Taylor Sheridan. I just love. I love the.
What's the newest one?
Is it Marshall?
Marshalls. Yeah, I keep seeing commercials for it all the time.
I've started watching numerous things from him, but just his ability to write, some of his one-liners just, they crack me up. I just love it. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Perfect. Well, thank you guys both so much for being here, for sharing your stories. It was a pleasure having you all here today.
Yeah, man. You guys are awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, it was great to be here.